They say the ocean takes what it pleases, merciless and wild, swallowing what it wants without apology. But sometimes in the most unexpected ways, the ocean returns something too. Sometimes it gives back a life, a second chance, a mystery wrapped in salt and silence. On one such night, battered by a storm that howled like ancient grief across the Oregon coast, a solitary man named Jack Whitmore stumbled upon something, or rather someone, clinging to Driftwood like it was the only truth left in the world. Neither he nor the woman he rescued knew that this encounter, this fragile, rain-soaked moment, would become the turning point of both their lives. What started as a simple act of survival slowly unraveled into something far deeper, a journey of healing, of trust born in silence, and of uncovering truths long buried beneath the waves. But before we immerse ourselves in this unforgettable tale, one filled with quiet romance, deep compassion, and the kind of hope that arrives just when it's needed most, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support allows us to keep telling stories that reach into the heart and stay there. Now let's begin. It started with a scream, the wind shrieking like a living thing across the jagged cliffs of the Oregon coast. The rain came sideways, violent and cold, drenching everything in its path, as if the heavens themselves were weeping. To most, the night was chaos. But for Jack Whitmore, it was just another Thursday. Inside his weathered boathouse, nestled beneath the cliffs, Jack crouched under the hull of an aging fishing schooner, wrench in hand, his brow tight with focus. The radio had given up hours ago, and the power had sputtered its last breath shortly after. Still, he worked on, by the trembling light of a lantern, his hands steady even as the storm outside roared like memory come to life. Jack wasn't afraid of storms. Not the ones outside, anyway. It was the silence that he feared, the quiet that clawed up from within, that carried ghosts he'd tried for a decade to forget. 10 years ago, a storm just like this one had taken everything from him. His wife, his daughter. They were meant to be out for a simple weekend sail, but the sea in its cruel mystery had other plans. No bodies had ever washed ashore, only splintered wreckage and a silence that never left. Since then, Jack had become a man of solitude, not quite broken, but certainly not whole. He had convinced himself that he was at peace with being alone, until the wind howled louder, wrenching him from his thoughts. The beams groaned overhead, and the boathouse creaked as if the sea itself was knocking. Jack set the wrench down, rose stiffly, and grabbed his coat. The generator needed tending. He stepped into the gale. The rain hit him like fists, icy and relentless. He muttered under his breath, pulling the coat tighter around him as he trudged toward the shed near the water's edge. That's when he heard it. At first, it was barely more than a whisper, a subtle knock amidst the chaos, wood tapping against stone, over and over, with a rhythm that felt urgent, not natural, not mechanical, something desperate. Jack stopped in his tracks, his breath caught in his chest. He veered toward the beach, instincts taking the reins. The sand was slick beneath his boots, every step a battle. He lifted his flashlight, its beam flickering across seaweed, shattered lobster traps and scattered debris. And then he saw her. A shape, small, crumpled, wrapped around a half-submerged plank of driftwood like it was her last thread to life. His heart lurched. He ran. As he got closer, the form sharpened. A woman, young, her arms locked around the driftwood with the kind of grip born of sheer will. Her soaked hair clung to her pale face, a gash above her eyebrow bleeding in thin rivulets. Her lips were tinged blue, and her body trembled violently. She was conscious, barely. Her eyes fluttered, unfocused. She whispered something that vanished in the wind and then collapsed into his arms. Without hesitation, Jack lifted her. She was cold, frighteningly cold, light as air. He held her tight, shielding her from the rain with his own body as he stumbled back toward the boathouse. Inside, he moved quickly. He laid her on the old cot in the corner, stripped off her soaked clothing down to what was necessary, and buried her under every blanket he owned. The fire sputtered, the logs damp, but he coaxed it to life. He remembered a portable heater tucked away. He found it, cursed softly, and switched it on. Her teeth chattered. Her eyes remained shut. Her breath came in shallow gasps. "Come on," Jack whispered, kneeling beside her. "You made it this far. Don't stop now." There was no phone service. The landline was dead. The road to town would be washed out for hours, maybe longer. So Jack did the only thing he could. He stayed. He sat by her side, rubbing warmth back into her fingers, feeding the fire, murmuring encouragement she couldn't hear. And as he watched her fragile chest rise and fall, something inside him stirred, something quiet, something he hadn't felt in 10 years, not grief, not sorrow, but the softest flicker of hope. By dawn, the storm had loosened its grip. The sea outside was calmer now, bruised, like a child who had cried itself to sleep. Thin sunlight filtered through the cracks in the walls. Jack brewed coffee, his eyes drifting to the woman on the cot. Her colour had returned. The shivering had eased, then suddenly her eyes opened. Hazel, wide, lost. She sat up too quickly, clutching the blanket around her like armour. Panic flashed in her gaze. Where? Where am I? Jack raised his hand slowly. Easy. You're safe. I'm Jack. I found you on the rocks outside during the storm. She looked around the room, confused, disoriented. Her fingers went to her temple. She winced. I don't remember, she whispered. Your name? Jack asked gently. She shook her head. Anything. I don't know who I am. Jack's chest ached. He had seen this kind of thing once before, during his service. Trauma so deep the mind shut itself off like a fuse blown to protect the heart. But seeing it in someone so young, so lost, it was something else entirely. That's okay, he said softly. You don't have to remember everything right now. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. Then her eyes fell to the piece of driftwood leaning near the door, the one she'd clung to like it was a memory. Until we figure out who you are, Jack said. Mind if I call you something? She hesitated, then gave a small shrug. How about Hope? She turned toward the window where the sea still stretched grey and vast. Hope, she whispered. That feels right. And just like that, something unspoken settled between them. Jack poured her a cup of coffee, his hands steady for the first time in a long while. Whatever storm had brought her here, whatever past she'd been torn from, this was where the new story began. The name lingered in the air like sea salt. Hope. Wrapped in his flannel shirt, her bare feet tucked beneath the old quilt, she sat quietly. Her clothes hung by the fire to dry, the fabric crusted with salt and survival. Jack moved about the small kitchen, preparing oatmeal with dried cranberries and honey, the best he could manage. He didn't push her for answers. Hope stared at her hands as if trying to remember what they used to do. No name, no past, just instinct. I thought maybe the smell of food might help, Jack said softly, setting the bowl on the table. Hunger's a language the body never forgets. She looked up. Thank you, again. You're welcome. Again, he smiled faintly, then turned, giving her space. She took a bite. Warmth spread through her, familiar but fleeting. I don't even know if I like oatmeal, she said quietly. Jack glanced over. You seem like someone who might. A ghost of a smile played on her lips. He let her eat in silence. Healing wasn't something you rushed. It came on its own terms. Later, she asked, that driftwood, the piece I was holding, do you still have it? Jack nodded. Right there. She walked to it, fingers tracing its damp, weathered surface. I don't know why I held on so tightly, she murmured. It felt like I needed to bring it with me. Sometimes, Jack said gently, the body remembers what the mind can't. She turned and looked at him fully then, at the grey in his hair, the calm in his eyes. Why were you out in the storm? She asked. The generator failed, he replied. I went to fix it, heard something knocking against the rocks. Found you. She swallowed. If you hadn't. We don't need to finish that sentence, he said softly. There was a coat by the chair. He gestured toward it. If you're up for it, there's a bluff behind the boathouse. Good place to think. That's where the sun shows up first. Hope nodded. The gesture felt right. She stepped into the boots he offered, too big, but warm, and followed him. The morning air was crisp, the sky unsure of itself. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in the soil, in the quiet. They walked in silence up the narrow path. At the top, the view opened wide, waves crashing below, gulls wheeling above. It's beautiful, she whispered, and terrifying, Jack added. The ocean's never just one thing. She took a breath. Do you think I fell off a boat? Could be. That wood looked like it came from something fancy. I keep seeing flashes, she said, voice trembling. Lights, music, a hand on my shoulder, then water, so cold. Jack said nothing. He only placed a hand gently on her shoulder, not to guide, not to fix, just to say, I'm here. The wind whispered through the tall grasses and salty air. and for the first time, Hope felt something stir within her, a subtle shift, as if something long locked was beginning to crack open. It wasn't a memory exactly, not yet, but a sense of presence. She was here. She was breathing. She wasn't alone anymore. There was life around her, and she was beginning to feel part of it. As they made their slow way back to the boathouse, her footsteps crunching softly against the gravel path, she glanced over at Jack and asked quietly, "Why did you name me Hope?" Her voice was tentative, like the question had been sitting inside her for a while. Jack didn't respond right away. He walked a few more paces before stopping, his eyes out toward the sea. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Because that's what I felt when I found you," he said, his voice low. "And that feeling, that's not something I'd felt in a very long time." Hope didn't answer. She didn't need to. When they reached the worn wooden steps of the boathouse, she paused. Something held her there. She turned back for one last glance at the sea, its waves curling gently under the dusky sky. A question stirred at the back of her throat, formless, unspoken. She didn't know who she truly was, or where she belonged in this vast, confusing world. But this man, this quiet, weather-worn place, this tender thread of connection between them, it felt like the beginning of something fragile and meaningful, something she couldn't yet name. Maybe, she thought, she didn't need to have all the answers right now. Maybe for now, just being called Hope was enough. She awoke to the smell of cedar smoke and sea air, thick and grounding, like something from a dream that lingered long after waking. It had been nearly 2 full days since Jack had discovered her washed up on the rocky shore, barely alive. Her body was slowly recovering, but her mind still felt fractured, like a mirror shattered into too many shards to piece back together. Fleeting glimpses came to her, sparkling champagne glasses clinking, the mechanical hum of powerful engines, a burst of sea spray hitting her face. But they were only fragments, wisps of memory that vanished before she could hold them. Still, she was here. She was alive, breathing, awake. And somehow, strangely, this place didn't frighten her. She pushed aside the old quilt and stepped off the narrow cot, her bare feet meeting the cool wooden floor. The room was still and quiet, sunlight pouring through the slats in golden strips. Outside, she heard the cries of gulls and the distant rhythm of waves breaking against the shore, interspersed with a faint tapping sound, steady and deliberate. Tools, perhaps. She followed the sound and found Jack outside, crouched beside an overturned rowboat. He didn't notice her at first, his focus consumed by the careful work of sanding the boat's keel. His movements were patient, practiced, like someone who'd long made peace with solitude. "Morning," she said softly. He looked up, squinting into the sunlight. "You slept late." "I feel like I haven't slept for days," she admitted, her voice still gravelly with sleep. "But thank you for everything." "I don't know how many times you've said that now," Jack replied with a shrug, "but you can keep saying it. Doesn't bother me." She gave a faint smile, stepping a little closer. "What are you working on?" Jack ran a hand across the smooth hull. "Just patching a crack. One of the local boys took her out in rough water last week. Came back half drowned and minus an oar." She reached out, fingertips tracing the wood. "You do a lot of work with your hands." "It's the only thing I trust anymore," he said quietly, wiping sweat from his brow. "Wood doesn't lie. If it breaks, it shows you where. People, not so much." There was no resentment in his tone, just a kind of tired honesty that made her listen closely. "I'd like to help," she said suddenly, the words surprising even her. Jack blinked. "Help? I don't know who I am or what I'm meant to be doing, but I can't just sit here waiting for my past to show up. Let me do something, even if I'm no good at it." He studied her for a moment, then handed her a sanding block. "Start here," he said, pointing to the boat's side, with the grain, not against it. She nodded and got to work. They spent the rest of the morning in a gentle, companionable silence. Jack showed her how to apply resin to seal the seams, how to spot waterlogged patches, how to feel whether a plank had one more season of sea left in it. Her hands trembled at first, but her determination didn't waver, and Jack quietly admired the steadiness that began to emerge in her efforts. When the sun was high above, they took a break. Jack handed her a thermos of water and a peanut butter sandwich, and the two of them sat side by side on an overturned crate, watching the surf roll in. Any new memories? He asked gently. Hope shook her head. Only flashes, she said, brow furrowed. A silver watch, a song playing, a voice saying my name. But not Hope, another name. I can't quite make it out. It'll come, Jack said. The brain's stubborn, but not a vault. Sooner or later, something clicks. Hope looked out toward the blue horizon. Do you ever wish you could forget? Jack didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip from his mug and let the question settle between them. Some days, yeah, he said finally. But forgetting means losing the good along with the bad, and I've got some good I want to keep. She didn't press, though she sensed a deeper story behind his words. Later, they walked the shoreline, the tide licking at their heels. Jack pointed out bird nests tucked in cliff crevices and showed her the smooth oval stones locals swore brought luck. She picked one up, a pale grey with a single white stripe, and slipped it into her pocket without quite knowing why. Suddenly she stopped, her breath hitching. Jack turned to her, concerned. What is it? I think, she said slowly, eyes wide. I think I was on a boat, a big one, not like these. It was sleek, expensive. There were lights, music, people laughing. Her voice trailed off, arms folding around her body. And then I fell. A pause. Or I was pushed. Jack stiffened, stepping closer, his voice calm but alert. You're safe now. Whatever happened, you made it through. But I don't know what I'm going back to, she whispered, her voice trembling. What if it's worse than not knowing? Jack wished he could give her a neat answer, a comforting promise. But he wouldn't lie. The truth was, sometimes the past could hurt more than the uncertainty. I don't know what's waiting for you, he said, but you won't have to face it alone. She looked at him then, really looked. And something shifted between them, something subtle and deep. They finished their walk in silence. At the boathouse steps, she paused. Would it be okay, she asked, if I stayed? Just until I figure things out? Jack nodded without hesitation. You're welcome here, Hope, for as long as you need. That evening they cooked together, simple food, soup and biscuits from scratch. They listened to the fire crackle and the sound of the sea breathing through the night. Outside, the wind still moved, but something else moved between them too. Tentative, cautious, yet unmistakably alive. Two people, shaped by loss, neither quite belonging to the past or the future, but holding on to the present like driftwood in a vast, uncertain sea. And for the first time since waking on that shore, Hope didn't feel like a stranger to herself. She felt something close to found. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the scattered tools, their disarray echoing the chaos inside her. A half-sipped mug trembled faintly in her hand as her gaze slowly shifted, settling not on the flames or the room, but on Jack. The look in her eyes was heavy, searching, vulnerable. "Would you help me?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Jack met her stare without flinching. "You don't even have to ask." And in that quiet, honest moment, something within her shifted, as if a locked gate had been nudged open from the inside. The tide of something ancient and aching in her soul began to turn, and for the first time in a long while she wasn't only the woman known as Hope, hiding behind flannel and silence. Nor was she just Margot Whitestone, heiress with a curated smile. She was both now. And the realization of what that meant, of the strength rooted in embracing all of herself, was just beginning to bloom. The boathouse, once a safe cocoon cradled between sky and sea, now held a silence of a different kind. Not stillness, but anticipation, the kind that breathes just before a storm or truth. Margot sat at the edge of the dock, her legs dangling over the worn planks, her hair fluttering in the salt-kissed wind. Her eyes were fixed on the yacht still moored in the harbour, the Marbelle. Just a day ago it had felt like a fragmented hallucination, a ghost ship from a life she'd buried. But now it stood boldly, a symbol of a past that refused to stay dead. Her fists clenched in her lap. "I should go down there," she muttered, almost to herself. Behind her, Jack stood silently with arms crossed, his eyes fixed warily on the vessel. He didn't answer at first. He knew that look. He'd seen it before. The look soldiers wore just before walking into fire. "What are you going to say?" he asked gently. She shook her head, frustration bubbling. "I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe just see if he's there." His jaw tensed. "If Victor Langley is on that yacht, walking down that dock could be dangerous." Margot turned to face him, eyes burning. "I'm not afraid of him." Jack's voice was hard. You should be. That man tried to kill you, Margot. That kind of danger doesn't just disappear. Her breath caught at the sound of her real name. It still felt foreign, like an old coat she wasn't sure fit anymore. She'd lived under the alias Hope for so long, wrapped in the comfort of not knowing. But the truth had cracked through now. She couldn't keep hiding. I need answers, she said, voice firm, and I can't get them standing here. Jack studied her for a long, silent beat. Her face had changed, not in the features, but in presence. She carried herself differently now, stronger, sharper, but with a fragility just beneath the surface, the kind that only exists in people who've faced death and chosen to rise anyway. You won't go alone, Jack said finally. If you insist on facing him, I'm going with you. As dusk fell, the marina hushed, and the last tourists vanished into town for dinner. Jack slipped on his weathered navy peacoat. Margot wore a simple black sweater and jeans she'd borrowed from a bin in the boathouse. Her hair was tied back, face bare. In her pocket, she tucked the smooth stone she'd found on the beach, a talisman, a reminder of strength. The lights on the yacht flickered on one by one. The Marbelle gleamed like a jewel under the moonlight, polished rails, white leather seats, and soft music drifting out from behind tinted glass. Its name shimmered in gold across the stern. As they approached, a crew member in a crisp white polo shirt glanced up. "Can I help you?" he asked. Margot stepped forward. To her own surprise, her voice didn't tremble. "I'm looking for Victor Langley." The man studied her face, his expression shifting with recognition. "One moment," he said, disappearing inside. Jack stepped subtly in front of her, shielding her with his presence. "You sure about this?" "No," she admitted. "But it's time." Footsteps returned, and then he appeared. Victor Langley stepped onto the deck with the casual arrogance of a man used to owning every room. Tall, tan, his linen shirt carelessly unbuttoned to just the right depth, but the moment his eyes landed on her, he froze. The breath between them stilled. "Margot," he breathed. She stood taller. "Hello, Victor." His gaze flicked to Jack, then back to her. "But they said you were dead." Her voice was ice. "I was, to you." Victor took a cautious step forward. "I thought you drowned. I called the Coast Guard." "Don't lie to me," she snapped. The words cracked in the air like brittle glass. "I remember now. Not everything, but enough." Victor's eyes darted to the nearby crew member. "This isn't the place," he murmured. "Let's go inside." "I'm not here to talk in private," she cut in. "I'm here to say that I remember. I know what you did, and I'm not going anywhere." Jack's presence loomed steady behind her, and Victor glanced his way, understanding the silent warning. "You don't have proof," he hissed. "I don't need all of it," she replied, her voice iron. "Because this time I'm not alone." From her pocket she drew a flash drive. Jack had helped her prepare it. Financial records, screenshots, wire transfers. Not the full picture, but enough. And more importantly, she had her voice now. One no longer silenced. Victor paled but tried to compose himself, forcing a thin smile. "We can settle this. Name your price." Her hands shook, but she stepped closer. "You already tried to erase me. This time, I decide how the story ends." Jack moved forward, his voice low and calm. "You should get off this boat, Mr. Langley, before you say something you'll regret." Victor sneered, but the warning was clear. He turned and disappeared without another word. Margot stood there, legs trembling, breath ragged. Jack's hand steadied her gently at her back. "You okay?" he asked. "No," she whispered, "but I'm glad I did it." They walked back under a sky slowly filling with stars, the tide lapping steadily beneath them, rising, inevitable, alive. That night, Margot stood wrapped in one of Jack's blankets, staring into the flames. Her thoughts flickered like the fire, memories of what she'd said and what still lingered inside. "I thought seeing him would make me feel powerful," she murmured, "but I just feel tired." Jack nodded. "It takes strength to survive someone who tried to erase you." "I think I'm starting to remember who I was," she said quietly, "but I don't know if I want to be her anymore." He looked at her, eyes soft. "Then don't be. Be someone new." She turned to him, and for the first time her expression held something other than fear, hope. His smile was gentle. "She's not such a bad person to be." Margot crossed the room, gazing out at the dark, endless sea. "I'm going to disappear again, but this time it'll be my choice, and when I come back it won't just be to fight. It'll be to live." Jack said nothing. He didn't need to. In his silence, there was trust. The world hadn't lost Margot Whitestone. She had simply chosen to begin again. The next morning arrived quietly, wrapped in grey sea mist. Jack moved slowly in the kitchen, pouring coffee as though trying to delay the inevitable. Across the room, Margot curled on the couch, knees hugged to her chest, eyes locked on the flash drive resting like a truth bomb on the table. "I forgot about this part," she whispered. "The part where I have to look." "You don't have to," Jack said gently. "Not unless you're ready." "I'm not ready," she replied, "but I have to do it anyway." She reached for the flash drive, slipped it into the laptop. Files opened, transaction logs, emails, spreadsheets, names, figures, her own forged signature. It all came back. Victor hadn't just been manipulative. He'd been strategic, calculated. He had wormed into her father's trust through shared ambition, concealing offshore dealings, shielding illegal assets. She had found one such file weeks before their engagement party, a fake freight company in the Caymans. When she confronted him, he'd smiled, told her it wasn't her concern. When she pushed, he became something else entirely. "You're being emotional," he'd said. "You don't understand how the world works." But she had understood enough to back up the files. And 2 days later, her email vanished, her phone gone, and she was boarding the Marbelle. "This wasn't cold feet," she whispered. "He knew I could destroy everything." Jack leaned forward. "Do you think your father knew?" The silence stretched. That question cut deeper than any betrayal. If her father knew, if he looked away, then everything was a lie. "My father doesn't deal in grey," she said bitterly. "Only in bottom lines. So either he helped Victor, or he saw you as the liability." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. "It's all dirt and dollars," she muttered. "The parties, the philanthropy, it was all window dressing. I used to think I was one of the good ones, that I could fix things. But I think my father never meant to let me in. I was just a name, a prop." Jack waited, calm in the storm. "I think I was never supposed to leave that boat," she whispered. Jack stepped forward. "But you did. You're here, and that matters." She turned to him, eyes blazing with pain and resolve. "Then I have to decide what to do with that fact." "You don't have to become who they expect," Jack said. "You can expose the truth. But if I do, it won't just destroy Victor, it'll destroy my father." Jack's voice was steady. "Then you have to choose. Protect the Empire, or protect the truth." Margot collapsed onto the couch, spiral nap, hands covering her eyes. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You already did the hard part," Jack said, kneeling beside her. "You survived. Now, choose what to live for." Later that day, they drove into town. Margot's first outing since the storm. She wore sunglasses and a baseball cap to stay hidden. Not that many people here read glossy magazines. They stopped at a quiet print shop run by one of Jack's old Navy friends. She scanned the most damning files, then mailed an unmarked envelope, no return address, to a journalist. And the next chapter began. Portland had once chewed up and spat out a man brave enough to expose the corrupt festering inside a powerful fishing empire. He had spoken the truth and lost everything. Margot thought of him now as she slipped the envelope into the mail slot, her fingers trembling with a gravity that went beyond nerves. There was no turning back from this. Her voice barely reached her own ears as she whispered, "There's no taking this back." Jack stood beside her, steady and solid. "Then don't look back," he replied, his tone gentle but resolute. Afterward, they sat together on a quiet bench overlooking the harbour. Boats rocked gently in their moorings, tethered yet free, swaying in the rhythm of the tide. The Marbelle was gone, a ghost already slipping from view. Victor had likely received her message by now, bold and unignorable. "Do you think they'll come after me?" she asked, voice low, uncertain. Jack didn't answer right away. When he did, his words held both truth and reassurance. "They'll try, but you're not who you were." Margot turned to look at him, searching his face. "And who am I now?" He met her gaze, eyes steady. Someone the world underestimated, and someone they'll regret crossing. She looked back toward the sea, which today shimmered with a strange calm. It was the same water that had almost swallowed her whole just days ago, but now it felt different, less threatening, almost alive. For so long, her identity had been sculpted by others, by her family name, by privilege, by a lineage of expectations. But now, for the first time, she was shaping her own legacy, not in wealth or power, but in truth. The truth they had buried and tried to silence. But she was still here, and she would not remain quiet. The fog that had hung thick over the coastline all morning began to lift, revealing a golden harbour and boats glistening like monuments of survival on the mirrored water. In silence, Margot and Jack walked back toward the boathouse, the wind catching the edges of the sweater she had borrowed. The envelope was gone. The truth was in motion. And now, all they could do was wait. Margot had expected to feel something triumphant, liberated, maybe even victorious. But instead, a quiet ache had settled deep inside her chest. It was the ache of something ending. And she knew, instinctively, that whatever came next wouldn't be simple. Inside the boathouse, she paced. "Do you ever feel like you're stuck in the middle of a bridge?" she asked suddenly. "Like you're not sure which way to go? Like you don't belong fully on either side?" Jack looked up from where he was sharpening a chisel, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't rush his reply. He never did. Setting down the tool, he wiped his hands on a cloth. "Yeah," he said, "more times than I'd like to admit." Margot leaned against the doorframe, her silhouette outlined by the fading daylight. The sea was calm now, indifferent to her turmoil, but inside her, the storm still brewed. "There's a part of me that wants to just disappear," she confessed. "To vanish, leave the Whitestone name behind, let them clean up their own mess. I could start over, somewhere quiet, maybe even here." Jack met her eyes again. He didn't speak, but his silence wasn't empty. It held room for her thoughts to settle, to stretch out. "But if I run," she continued, "then they win. And worse, I'll always wonder. Could I have done more? Could I have helped someone else avoid the trap I fell into?" Jack stepped toward her, closing the space between them. "You've already done more than most people in your position would dare," he said. "But this isn't just about doing more. It's about asking yourself what you want." She looked up at him, suddenly exposed. "That's the problem. I don't know what I want. Not yet." Jack nodded, patient. "Then don't rush the answer." She lingered a moment longer before drifting back outside to the cedar tree on the bluff, where the wind whispered through its branches like an old song. She sat alone for nearly an hour, motionless but thinking, the weight of everything pressing into her shoulders. When she returned, dusk was settling in. Jack was boiling water for tea, the small cabin warm with familiarity. Margot placed a folded piece of paper on the table. "What's this?" Jack asked. "My full name, social security number, a few emergency contacts in case something happens to me." Jack's jaw tightened. "That's not going to happen. It probably won't," she agreed. "But if it does, I want someone I trust to know who I am." He looked at the paper, then at her. "Why me?" "Because you don't want anything from me." Her words landed like a weight in the room, undeniable and raw. Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Everyone wants something, Margot. Even me." She raised an eyebrow, curious. "Oh, and what is it that you want?" He hesitated, searching her expression for permission. "I want you to know you deserve better than people who use you. I want you to know you can stay if you want to, that you don't owe the world a performance just because it's watching." Her eyes softened, not tears but truth. She sat down across from him. "You've been honest with me since the beginning," she said, "even when it hurt." "I figured you'd had enough lies to last a lifetime," Jack said. "Yeah," she said with a quiet smile, "I have." They drank tea in the kind of silence that felt earned, not awkward, but sacred. As the last of the sunlight melted across the windows, Jack stood and retrieved something from a drawer, a tiny hand-carved boat. 6 inches long, delicate and smooth. "I made this a few years ago," he said, placing it in her hands. "After the accident, after I lost my wife and daughter, I didn't know what else to do with my hands." Margot studied the boat, brushing her fingers along its edge. "It's beautiful," he nodded. "Couldn't fix what was broken, so I shaped wood instead." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Some losses never leave," he said. "You just carry them differently." She held the boat to her chest for a long moment, then set it gently on the table. "I think I get it now. I've been trying to figure out who I'm supposed to be. Margot Hope, the Heiress girl, the one who disappeared. But maybe I don't have to be just one thing." Jack met her eyes. "No one ever does." That night, Margot sat at the old desk, a pen in hand and a blank notebook before her. She wrote not legal statements or public declarations, but letters. To her father, to the journalist who once believed in her, to the lawyer who had let her down, and finally to herself. When she looked up, Jack had fallen asleep by the fire, a book resting in his lap. His face, softened by sleep, was the face of a man who knew grief but chose not to be hardened by it. She thought of his words, not rushing the answer. Maybe that bridge she felt stuck on wasn't a place of indecision after all. Maybe it was exactly where she needed to be. Not lost, just not finished yet. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't standing on it alone. It was just a glance, nothing more. And then the train pulled away, carrying Margot Hope with it. She was gone. That evening, Jack sat alone on the porch of the boathouse, the sky above painted in shades of soft indigo and rose. A glass of bourbon rested loosely in his hand, the amber liquid catching the fading light. The wind, gentle but persistent, tousled his hair like a familiar friend trying to comfort him. In front of him, the ocean stretched wide and quiet, its usual rhythm stilled as if it, too, had paused to remember her. He didn't know exactly where she was headed now. Perhaps her first stop would be a lawyer's office. Maybe she'd go to her father's home, or straight to the press. It didn't really matter. What mattered, what truly mattered, was that she had walked back into that world entirely on her own terms, her own 2 feet carrying her. She wasn't pushed nor pulled. She chose to walk forward. On the table beside him sat a small, carved wooden boat. He picked it up, turning it gently in his calloused hands. She had left it behind, intentionally, deliberately. Beneath it, a note, folded, precise, written in that distinct handwriting of hers. It read, "This helped me find my way. Keep it for me. I'll come back for it, and for the person I was when I met you." A faint smile crept across Jack's face, not a grin, not a showy expression, just a quiet, knowing curve of the lips, the kind of smile that doesn't fade quickly, but lingers long after it's gone. Tomorrow, the fog would roll in again, low and thick. The sea would stir once more. His tools would hum back to life as his hands returned to their work, but something fundamental had shifted. Something deep within him had changed in a way that could never quite be undone. He hadn't rescued her. Not really. She had rescued herself, but in doing so she had awakened something long dormant in him, the reminder that even in the darkest depths of life, hope could still be found, and sometimes it arrived on the tide when you least expected it. It didn't take long, less than 48 hours, for the world to take notice. Margot's return hit the news like lightning, cracking across a black sky. The moment she stepped through the polished, rotating doors of the downtown Portland law firm, an establishment that had managed her family's affairs for more than 2 decades, a junior associate recognized her instantly. By the time she exited the building, flanked by a legal aide and gripping a folder thick with documents, the headlines were already rolling out, crashing across screens like relentless waves. Missing Heiress returns from the dead. Margot Whitestone speaks. Betrayal, survival, and a fight for the truth. Victor Langley under federal investigation after explosive evidence surfaces. On that first day, Margot didn't speak to the sea of reporters clamoring for sound bites. She let the documents do the talking. Bank statements, digital backups, forged signatures, all corroborated by her handwritten testimony filed directly with the district attorney. There was no drama, no performance, just truth. Cold, precise, and razor-sharp, like a scalpel in a surgeon's steady hand. Still, that didn't stop the media from spinning their narratives. The television filled with dramatic reenactments of the night she had vanished. Talk shows dissected her former relationship with Victor Langley. Panels of experts speculated endlessly. Photos of her from long-forgotten charity galas resurfaced. Clips from boardroom meetings played on loop. They tried to piece together who she was from fragments of the polished public image she had once presented. A girl in her 20s trying to prove she was more than just her father's legacy. She watched all of it unfold from the quiet solitude of a hotel room booked under a false name. On the screen, Margot looked pristine, glossy, perfect, unreachable. But the woman curled up in bed, with dark circles under her eyes and a heart still learning how to beat freely, didn't recognize that version of herself. A knock at the door broke the silence. Her lawyer, Rebecca Sloane, entered, holding a tablet blinking with notifications and a copy of the New York Times. "You're going viral," Rebecca said dryly, setting everything down on the table. "Perfect," Margot muttered, her tone heavy with irony. "Every survivor's dream." Rebecca folded her legs and sat down, her posture gentle, like someone about to deliver difficult news. "They're going to subpoena Victor officially," she said softly. "But your father? He's more complicated." Margot's fingers tightened around her mug. "He knew?" Rebecca hesitated. "We can't prove direct knowledge, but he signed off on the deals Victor used, offshore accounts, asset shielding. If he didn't know, he should have. Negligence at best, willful blindness at worst." There was more. Rebecca slid the tablet across the table. A pre-recorded video began to play. Her father, Alexander Whitestone, seated behind his grand mahogany desk in the Manhattan office. He looked older, thinner, but still imposing. "My daughter Margot's return is a blessing beyond words," he said. "We are grateful she is alive and safe. Any allegations involving Mr. Langley or the Whitestone Corporation will be addressed through the appropriate legal channels. In the meantime, we ask for privacy as our family reunites and heals." He didn't say her name again, didn't speak of her courage, her truth, her pain. Margot shut the screen off. "Classic deflection," Rebecca murmured. "He's trying to keep the board calm," Margot said, rising to the window. Portland spread out beneath her, alive, busy, unaware. People walking, living, reading her name in headlines, judging or wondering. "I didn't come back for him, or for the company." "I know," Rebecca replied. "I came back so they couldn't erase me." "And you didn't let them," Rebecca said. "You shook the whole damn house." That afternoon, Margot agreed to a single interview. Not for fame, not for profit, just to speak on her own terms. She chose a quiet podcast hosted by a woman known for giving survivors a space to speak. No bright lights, no theatrics, just voices, just truth. When the interview aired, it wasn't her composure or even her tears that captivated the world. It was a single line. "I didn't drown. I was pushed, and I will never let them bury the truth again." Back at the Oregon coast, Jack watched the clip in the gentle glow of his boathouse. The fire crackled. The kettle whistled softly. Gulliver, the stray cat who had recently adopted Jack, was curled comfortably at his feet. Jack hadn't turned on a television in years, but this was different. There she was, Margot, clear-eyed, calm, unflinching, still her, but also more. She wasn't the broken figure he had once found clinging to Driftwood, gasping for air. She had become the storm itself, navigating through it with purpose. He smiled again, soft and small, taking a sip of tea and leaning back. She had done it, not just survived, but fought. Stood tall, spoke out. She hadn't called. He hadn't expected her to. She was deep in it now, lawyers, cameras, courtrooms. But the small carved boat still sat on his windowsill, bathed each afternoon in sunlight. He left it there, waiting. The first letter came on a Thursday, tucked between a parts catalogue and a Sea Festival flyer. No return address. But he knew her handwriting, slanted, precise, like someone who had learned to write with intention. He opened it with a carpenter's knife. "Dear Jack, I don't know where to begin, so I'll start here. I'm okay. Not always okay, not every moment, but I'm standing. And that's a kind of victory, too. Everything you said about choosing who you want to be, it's in my bones now. Some days I don't know which version of me I'm stepping into, but the difference is I'm not afraid anymore." Victor had been indicted. His accounts frozen. He couldn't buy silence this time. Her father had asked her to step back from the spotlight, for family image. She had refused. But what mattered most came at the end of her letter. "Jack, you reminded me that truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's found in the quiet. In the man who builds instead of boasts, who listens instead of shouts. You didn't just help me survive, you helped me remember." Jack read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in the old wooden cigar box beneath his workbench, where sacred things belonged, and the letters kept coming, from Vermont, from the Catskills, from coastal retreats. Margot wasn't hiding. She was healing, building something of her own. Jack replied after the 4th letter, just a few lines. "The boathouse is quieter without you, but it still holds your footsteps. I'm proud of you, not just for surviving, but for the way you did it, with grace, with grit, on your own 2 feet. Take your time. The tide doesn't need rushing." And her answer came. "Maybe I've been the tide all my life, Jack. rushing in, reshaping everything. But now, I think I just want to be the shore, waiting. Ready, steady. Do you still have the little boat? I think of it often, how the light must catch it in the afternoon. I miss the sound of your kettle. I miss the silence between your words. I miss you. Jack never showed the letters to anyone. He didn't need to. They were pieces of her, sent like messages in a bottle, drifting across miles. They reached places in him he had sealed off long ago. And one evening, just as the sun began to sink, Jack walked down to the water's edge. In his hands he held the little wooden boat, the one she had left behind. He didn't place it in the sea to say goodbye. He placed it in the sea to say, "I'll be here when you're ready to come home." It rocked gently at first, uncertain in the current before finding its rhythm, graceful, steady, as though it remembered how to belong to the water. Watching it, Jack smiled. There were moments in life, he believed, that weren't about chasing after what was lost. Sometimes it was more about standing still long enough to realize that what is truly meant for you doesn't vanish. It circles back when the tide is ready. The early spring sun lingered now, hanging like a promise above the cliffs behind his boathouse. The harsh winds of winter had softened, losing their bite, but keeping just enough crispness to remind you of how far you'd come. Gulls cried overhead, not in hunger or warning, but in a lazy sort of joy, tracing loops in the sky as if writing invisible poems above the harbour. Jack, as he often did, kept his hands moving. Today, it was a weathered canoe he was restoring, one that had once belonged to an old fisherman further down the coast. The salt air had gnawed at its bones over the years, and a split along the keel told stories of storms and survival. But Jack didn't shy away from vessels like this. He preferred them, really. Bruised but not broken, they reminded him of people. He was smoothing down the grain, sanding the edge with care, when a sound broke the stillness. It wasn't the clatter of a fishing truck or the groan of delivery vans on gravel. No, this was softer, more familiar. A hum that wrapped itself around memory. He didn't turn around right away. He didn't need to. He felt it. Instead, he set the sanding block down with quiet reverence and slowly stood, wiping his hands on an old rag, his chest already tightening with emotion he hadn't dared name. The car stopped just outside. A door opened, closed, then silence. When he finally turned, she was there, Margot. Her hair was longer now, touched by wind and time, darker at the ends and curled in soft waves. Her coat danced just above her knees and a canvas tote clung gently to one shoulder. She wore nothing that shielded her, not makeup, not jewelry, not even a practiced expression. But her eyes, those piercing, steady eyes, hadn't changed. If anything, they were clearer, anchored. Neither of them spoke, not at first. They simply stood, separated by only a few feet and what felt like the entire stretch of their past. Emotions ran high, uncertainty, joy, grief, relief, all tumbling together. They didn't know whether to cry or laugh or both. Then Margot stepped forward. "I didn't want to write this time," she said, her voice hushed by the breeze. "I needed to say it." Jack gave a small nod, his throat too tight for words. "I'm back," she continued. "Not because I ran out of places to run, or because I needed another pause. I've reached the edge of every map, and I realized this is where the road finally softens again." She glanced toward the boathouse, the swaying cedar tree, the porch where they had once watched the world grow quiet together. "This is where I want to begin. Not start over. Begin, for real." He swallowed hard. "Are you sure?" "I'm not sure of anything," she admitted, a smile tugging at her lips, "except that I don't want to write the next chapter without you." He exhaled, something between a sigh of surrender and relief. "You didn't have to come back." "I know," she said softly, "but I wanted to." He stepped toward her and she met him halfway. A small, genuine smile warmed her face as Jack reached out, gently tucking a strand of wind-blown hair behind her ear. His hand lingered a little longer than necessary. "I kept the boat," he whispered. Her eyes shone. "I knew you would." Together they walked to the bluff, that same spot where they had once stood, her filled with restless hope, him still too scared to believe in second chances. Now things felt different. Now they felt ready. She reached into her tote and pulled out her journal, the one she'd carried across countless cities and quiet train rides. Alongside it, a small beach stone. Her good luck. She placed them both on the bench. "Aren't you going to throw it back to the sea?" Jack asked gently. She shook her head, her gaze steady. No, some things aren't meant to be let go. They're meant to be planted. She looked around the place, the cliffs, the sky, the whispering tide. This place has seen versions of us we don't talk about, the broken ones, the lost ones. But maybe, just maybe, we're the version that's ready now. Jack turned to her, eyes full. When you look ahead, what do you see? She paused, then smiled. A garden, a small workshop, maybe a dog, I don't know. A life, one that doesn't feel like a performance. He studied her a moment longer before nodding. You don't have to be anyone's legacy here. I know, she said. That's why I came back. They stood in shared silence, the kind that doesn't press for words. Later, back in the boathouse, Margot made tea while Jack lit the fire. It felt effortless, like she'd only stepped out for a long errand and had returned before the day was over. There was no talk of lawsuits, boardrooms, or headlines. That world had grown distant, and rightfully so. I've thought a lot about healing, Margot said, handing him a mug. People expect it to be linear, like a timeline or a ladder, but I think it's more like stitching a sail, slow, careful, invisible, until suddenly, one day, it catches the wind again. Jack smiled. That's a good way to put it. She tucked her legs beneath her, curling into the chair. I used to think I had to rebuild my old life, shine it up, reclaim it. But now, I don't want that life. I want something true, even if it's small, even if it's quiet. He sipped. You sure you're ready for quiet? She grinned. As long as it's the kind where silence says more than words ever could. Jack nodded. Something deep inside him softened. He had never dared dream this far. But now, with the fire crackling and her voice humming in the stillness, he allowed himself to hope. Not a grand finale, not a fairy tale, but a return, a real one. That spring on the Oregon coast was gentle. The days stretched slowly. The air no longer stung, it soothed. Jack rose early now, not from duty but from joy. Margot's soft humming in the kitchen, the smell of coffee, and the whisper of old wooden floors beneath bare feet had become his new rhythm. She was back, not as the woman who had disappeared into power and privilege, but as someone who had rescued herself. I was hope when I needed saving, she had once said. I'm Margot now, because I found myself. Behind the boathouse, a small garden flourished. Basil, tomatoes, sunflowers, and stories buried like seeds beneath the soil. Jack built her raised beds out of driftwood, each piece etched with poems or memories. She watered barefoot, laughing when the hose curled around her ankles. And when she pressed seeds into the ground, it felt like she was planting pieces of herself, parts she was finally ready to grow, not hide. One afternoon, they returned to the exact place Jack had first brought her to the sea, the day she didn't even remember her name. She knelt there, pulled out a small wooden plaque she'd carved herself, and drove it gently into the earth. It read, "Here begins again." Jack didn't speak. He just took her hand, and together they watched the waves roll in, constant, enduring. In town, people noticed. The woman with quiet eyes who volunteered at the library, the man with calloused hands who fixed boats and wore a simple silver ring, a gift from Margot. No fanfare, just a symbol. You never asked me to stay, she told him one night. I didn't want you to feel like you owed me. She had cupped his face gently. Then I'm staying, because I don't. She never went back to her family's mansion in New York. Her father called twice, once to make peace, once to offer a public reunion. She declined both, but she did send him a letter, written by hand. I hope you find something real where legacy once lived. He never replied. That was okay. Some endings require no audience. Only peace. Victor Langley was indicted. Margot testified, calm, unshaken. She walked out of court and never looked back. Justice was served, but more importantly, so was her healing. And then, one quiet morning, long after the headlines faded, Margot stood barefoot on the beach, Jack beside her. Out on the water, their little sailboat bobbed softly. We should name her, she said. You saved her, Jack replied. You name her. Margot smiled, tracing the carved lettering along the hull. Driftwood Grat's perfect, she whispered. She was broken, Jack said, but worth saving. Her eyes misted. Like us. They stepped into the boat. No rush, no crowd, just wind and trust. And as the sea opened before them, not threatening, but full of possibility, Margot let her fingers trail through the water. The same sea that had once stolen her name now returned it, piece by piece. This wasn't about being rescued. It was about returning, rebuilding, becoming. A love not loud, but lasting. Not a goodbye, but a beginning.